probiotic use.
Great. Neelam, you can have the dice, please.
Thank you so much for this Women's Day celebration and wishing everybody, and there's a lot of women in this forum, and I would like to thank the Probiotic Science Foundation and the Yakult India for giving this opportunity. And I think I must admire her for titling it beautifully from bench to clinical thing. As you could see the previous speaker, and so I would be talking totally clinical. We heard august speakers yesterday who was trying to highlight about the importance of understanding the basic pathophysiology and the research that is going on in probiotics. So my presentation, I would like to divide it first to understand when we talk about this microbiome, what is this role of microbiome in inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, that has been allotted to me. And then I would go to first talk about the role of probiotic in ulcerative colitis, and I would divide that into three groups: treating an acute inflammation in ulcerative colitis, or maintenance treatment, or the pouchitis which we create post-surgery. When we do a surgery and remove the colon, which I will talk about, then it can come back. So we're talking about that. And I'll talk about the role of probiotics in Crohn's disease. And as you heard, I've been introduced as a pediatric gastroenterologist. So I would do justice to both the adults and the children, because I'm going to give studies both for the adult, which are more dominating, and also include the studies that have come in children. So yesterday we heard the speakers talk about the definition which was given in mid-1960s for a probiotic, and the WHO definition which came in 1960. But I would like to remind the audience here is, if we look into the Charaka Samahita, which is actually written in 1000 BC, which is actually talking about the treatment of Ayurveda, it talks about Jataragini, which is fire in the stomach, and it mentions that there is a beneficial microbial flora of GI tract, and there is also a word about Takra, that is the fermented milk, as Amrita or elixir. So we are actually talking about something which we knew 1000 BC, but in mid-1960s, we defined it as a probiotic, and we heard all about it. So certain interesting facts, just recapitulating for those who were not here yesterday, is that we know that the gut contains more than 10 to the power of 14 bacterial organisms with different 1000 species, but let me remind you, it adds on to a weight of almost 1 to 2 kgs. And in total, the number of bacteria is 10 times the cells that we have in a human body. And these genes, the bacterial genes, are 100-fold more genes than our human genome. So we have a lot of microbiome existing. So we heard yesterday that actually, if I divide the gut microbial, there is something common to all, which the speakers were talking about. In 80 to 90%, it's like the common organism. But it is this which makes us all differ. There is some individualized the microbiota, which could be the healthy or the bad microbiota, talking about the fecal transplant, talking about the change in the first 2 years of life that the speaker was talking about yesterday. So it is that part which differs. So coming back to my topic, which is the pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease and the importance of microbiome. So first we need to understand, does the microbiome have any role in IBD? We have a lot of evidence which supports the hypothesis that the intestinal microbiota have an effect in pathogenesis. Both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, which occur in the colon and the terminal ileum, they have the highest intestinal bacterial concentration. And in Crohn's disease, a pathogenic role was incriminated when it could be prevented and treated by a diversion of the fecal stream. And when they reinfused the ileostomy contents back, there was reactivation of the inflammation, suggesting the role of this. In UC, ulcerative colitis, the patients who undergo the pouch that I was talking about, the surgery, where the ileum is connected with a pouch there, and you remove the entire colon and the rectum, and the mucosal inflammation will occur only after bacterial colonization of the pouch, again giving the importance of the microbiome in that recurrence of the disease there. And then there were a lot of studies on the animal models which were talking about the gut microbiota and the development of IBD. In the experimental model, Tarag et al. Beautifully showed that the same genetically engineered animal who had this tendency for developing a spontaneous colitis under standard lab condition, when they were kept in a sterile, germ-free environment, mind you, they were all genetically engineered, yet there was no bacterial exposure and they did not develop colitis, thus again emphasizing the importance of bacterial exposure as an important role. We've been now blessed with the understanding of genes, why somebody is predisposed to IBD. The majority of the genes that we've identified are actually those which are affected and which code for the proteins that affect to preserve our mucosal barrier or that helps to regulate the host immune system. So these genes are being hampered, and we are all familiar with the greatest discovery of this NOD2 and CART15 gene in the IBD development. This gene also encodes a protein which is responsible for the microbial recognition, induction of the antimicrobial gene, and control of the host adaptive immune response. So what I was trying to emphasize is thus the role of these intestinal bacteria in the pathogenesis of IBD. We have shown not only in the animal models, but in the clinical settings, both genetically and in these, that these were responsible for that. Because the microbe, when they get into the susceptible individual, they trigger a cascade of reactions stimulating the Th1 and Th2, and thus giving rise to mucosal damage. This is not probiotic I'm talking about. I'm talking about the inflammatory disease where the mucosal damage occurs. But you've all seen these slides. This is exactly the way the probiotic is acting. So theoretically, probiotic is going to really do wonders in IBD, because all that I was talking about has been, we said that these genes are actually going to the receptors which will attach to the, and be predisposed for the pathogenic bacteria. The probiotic is going to compete for this bacteria. We talked about the mucin barrier being damaged. The probiotic is going to give rise to this and prevent the mucin damage. And we talked about the immune the immune deficiency that is occurring in these genetically predisposed, and the probiotic as stimulation of the immunity. So with that background, I will go into the studies for the next few minutes. So let's take ulcerative colitis first. In the ulcerative colitis, I will take the first section as the treatment of the active inflammation in ulcerative colitis. Now, we have these studies which have been before 2007, because the most of the Cochrane analysis used to talk about these studies. Now, if you see the initial studies which came, and they used a decent dose of around 1 × 10 to the power of 10 and 11, and they were randomized or double-blind control, and the probiotic strain that was used in one was the Yakult with 5-SA as compared to the placebo. Mind you, all of them were small studies, 20 versus 10. The second is 90 and 30 and 115, the placebo group. So different probiotics had been tried. One was the Yakult, one was the probiotic with balasalicide, and the E. coli Nestle strain. But in these studies, the meta-analysis that was done by Malan et al., they concluded that addition of a probiotic to conventional therapy did not improve the remission rate in patients with mild to moderate ulcerative colitis, but yes, it just reduces the disease activity. But following 2007, there have been a lot of other trials which are talking differently, and let us see a couple of them. As I said, I will do justice to children. This is a very interesting study in ulcerative colitis in children with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, where steroids were used in a dose of 1 milligram per kg to a maximum of 40, with mesalamine 50 milligram per kg. And they were a small group, 14 versus 14. Now, there was one group in which they added probiotic VSL3, while in the other group, they used placebo. So when I talk about induction, that means the first getting in the active inflammation. So in acute active inflammation, the remission was obtained in 92.8% versus 36%. This was a significant study by Miele et al. And this triggered a lot of interest, again relooking into the role of probiotics and probably understanding maybe there's the right probiotic and the right dose that we need to see, and that was what. So another study which is recently published, very recently, was about 30 children with mild to moderate ulcerative proctitis and proctosigmoiditis. So we all know that ulcerative colitis is a majority of the time it would be limited to proctitis or proctosigmoiditis, especially in adults, and so also in children, though less often in adults. And in this group, what they did was they used the probiotic enemas of Lactobacilli reiteri along with the mesalazine, which was continued. And in the placebo group, it was just the mesalazine without the enemas. And this was given for a period of 8 weeks. And what was there? There was both clinical and endoscopic improvement in the probiotic group, histological improvement in the probiotic group, again P less than 0.01, and not only the clinical, endoscopic, histological, they've shown also with the increase in the expression of IL-10 and decrease in the level of TNF-alpha, IL-8, and IL-1B in the Lactobacillus reiteri group. This again generated a lot of interest in using probiotics in the ulcerative colitis, where we're talking about in the maintenance group as oral, or probably considering even a rectal enema in these patients. And there was this Fujimori study where I just wanted to highlight, because people want to know about, they tried to talk about that once the patient was on stable dose of 5-ASA plus minus prednisolone and had achieved 4 weeks in remission, or the patients were in mild active, they gave one arm prebiotics, one arm probiotic, B-longum, and one arm both pre and probiotic. And they thought that the combination of probiotic once a day and prebiotic twice a day was more beneficial in their study that was published. And so talking about this study, which I have to talk because it's a large Indian study. Sood et al. From Chandigarh, they did a multi-centric, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial from India, and it was on a large group. As you can see, the treatment group was 77 versus placebo group 70 group, and they gave VSL3, and it was predominantly an adult-oriented study from India, and with mild to moderate ulcerative colitis, the dose that for use of VSL3, 3.6 into 10 to the power of 12 colony-forming units, given twice daily for 12 weeks. And the primary endpoint was 50% reduction in ulcerative colitis disease activity index, so at 6 weeks. So the primary endpoint, which was 50% reduction at 6 weeks, was achieved in 32.5% versus 10%, which was clinically significant. And the secondary endpoint was looking at the same group at 12 weeks, and that was 43% versus 15%. So this was again pretty significant, and thus highlighted again the importance of probiotic in the adult, in the initiation and in the getting the response to therapy and reduction of the ulcerative colitis disease activity index. So now the second group, I will talk about the maintenance of remission. That means having achieved the first reduction of acute inflammation, and then how long can I maintain the remission and go into relapse. So in these studies, as you can see, again, if I go back before 2007, there have been 4 studies, and Crew et al. First, they took E. coli Nicely, and they compared it with mesalazine, and if you see here, concomitant therapy, that means it was just the probiotic alone which they were using for the maintenance and not with any other thing. So they compared it to mesalazine, and what they found was there was no statistical difference between using mesalazine or using a probiotic for the relapse. In short, either they were equally better or equally worse. So for maintenance of the therapy, they compared, and the same group again took a little larger group, and a little, here it was 50 and here it is 162, and the dose was also probably increased from 10 to the power of here to 2.5 to 25 to 10 to the power of 9. And again here they compared it with mesalamine, and they said that it is as effective as mesalamine in maintaining the remission in this group. So that is talking about the probiotic in the remission group. Besides that, there were 2 other studies which I quoted with the other Lactobacillus salivarius and Bifidobacterium infantis, and again they either compared it to a placebo and used concomitant therapy as a minosalicylate, and there was no statistical difference. Now, I talked about this Miele et al. Study, if you recollect just now, and I said that it was, there was a difference of 90% versus 32% in achieving the treatment response in the acute inflammation. Now, the same group, what they did was continued in the maintenance phase and wanted to see when is the relapse. So even not only in the induction or in the acute inflammation, in the small group of children, what they showed was after achieving the response, they continued with the probiotic compared to a placebo, and the relapse, and some of them were on concomitant therapy with mesalamine. So as an adjunct therapy, this is highlighting adjunct therapy because they were concomitantly using, the relapse in 1 year was 21% versus 73. So it was also useful in maintenance of remission in children in this small cohort that they talked about. And I was talking about this Fujimori study of the Synbiotic, where they use both prebiotic and probiotic. Even they continued the same thing in the maintenance phase, and they used actually a quality of life score. And in that quality of life score, there was no statistical difference in the quality of IBD quality compared with the baseline for those, but they thought that it was better with Synbiotic, that is using both probiotic and prebiotic together, the previous study which I talked about. So what I think we need to emphasize is, it's not only the probiotic, but it is what probiotic and also the dose which really matters. Because if you could see, I highlighted some studies before 2007 where it didn't work, and we used different probiotics. So probably VSL3 did a better response in ulcerative colitis in these. So now coming to the third part of ulcerative colitis, which is the treatment of pouchitis. So I talked about the induction of therapy, I talked about the maintenance, and I now go into the pouchitis. What is pouchitis? Basically, proctocolectomy, that is the surgery removing the rectum and the colon, with ileal, the terminal ileum, ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So use the anus part and connect the ileum and create a pouch with it. That is required in some ulcerative colitis patients because the disease may be medically intractable and you've used a lot of therapy and you think that it's now high time for a surgery, or there is secondary dysplasia or a cancer. And pouchitis is the name where you give, where there is inflammation of this ileal reservoir which was created, and then that is seen between 15 to 50% of the patient, and it is the most common complication of the surgery. We don't know why it occurs, but we think that there is definitely the host genetic factors involved and the local pouch issues. And I really emphasized in my previous pathogenesis that definitely the microbiota within the pouch plays a lot of role, because when there was no microbiota in the pouch, they did not have the recurrence of ulcerative colitis or pouchitis in that pouch. So what I'm trying to emphasize, only in one single slide, whether before 2007 or after 2007, unanimously, all of them showed beautiful response in the use of VSL3 or lactobacillus GG in the small cohort or studies that they have used in compared to placebo. There was no concomitant therapy used, and there was increased duration of remission with P less than 0.05, less than 0.001, less than 0.01. So in all the studies, VSL3 was beautifully highlighted along with lactobacillus for pouchitis. Similarly, thereafter, even studies later on showed the same. So we are now very clear that in pouchitis, it really helps in reducing the pouch disease activity index and in improving the T regulatory cells and controlling that. So to sum up the probiotics in ulcerative colitis, we thought that over the last few years, we saw some more robust efficacy of probiotics as compared to the Cochrane, which was in 2007, and especially VSL3 was supposed to induce remission in mild to moderately active ulcerative colitis. Not only that, probably the efficacy of probiotic as an adjunct therapy also was useful in those who failed to the standard therapy and who otherwise required a just step up of steroids or immunosuppression. This was probably an important contribution to the clinical field. And I would also emphasize that the beneficial effect of the probiotic that was reported in children with ulcerative colitis in 2 good studies have been a group which we would like to avoid the use of steroids that could lead further growth retardation. And I must emphasize here that these studies have been small in number, and it is maybe larger studies would definitely be required. So if I had to sum up into the level of evidence, because that's how you can impress a clinician, is that for induction of remission, which in my presentation 3 years back or 4 years back, I had written in a chapter in a book, and I had given it level B. And now I've changed, and in induction of remission and maintenance of remission, we are giving level A evidence is emerging. And for pouchitis, it was earlier also level A. It continues to be level A evidence for clinicians for the use of that. And just a couple of slides for the probiotics in Crohn's disease. If we look into the studies which came before 2007, now in the Crohn's disease, the Lactobacillus GG, Lactobacillus johnsoni, in a good 10 to the power of 10 billion colony-forming units were used, small studies, randomized, double-blind, randomized controlled studies, and in these studies, they found that there was no statistical difference either in the clinical remission or in the endoscopic scores for those who used probiotic in Crohn's disease. And there was this hype about Saccharomyces boulardii in a small double-blind randomized controlled study where it was used, and they said that there was improved permeability and maintenance of remission. But then there was another study in 2013 where after achieving emission with the use of steroids or the ASAs, and once they were in remission, then they only used Saccharomyces boulardii versus a placebo with no concomitant therapy. And the primary endpoint was to see how many percentage continued to be in remission after 52 weeks or 1 year of the therapy. So at the end of 1 year, the frequency of relapses or the percentage who was in remission in the Saccharomyces boulardii was 47% versus 53% in the placebo, which was not statistically different. And the time to relapse was also not statistically different in both the group that was seen. Now, in children, unfortunately, there are very limited 2 studies which I'm quoting. One was just an open label on 4 patients. So an open label pilot evaluation on 4 children who were given Lactobacillus GG 10 to the power of 10 colony forming, and they thought that it improved the gut barrier function in children with mild to moderately activity, stable Crohn's disease, but obviously they highlighted the role of further double-blind trial that would be required. There was this multi-centric USA trial with Lactobacillus GG in pediatric Crohn's disease, where 75 children from different centers were recruited between 5 to 21 years. They used 2 groups, one the Lactobacillus GG and one placebo. There was no difference in adverse events, so that means it was safe. But there was no difference in the time to relapse. That means it did not prolong the remission by using the Lactobacillus GG. So what did I sum up with the probiotic in Crohn's disease? There was no great evidence for efficacy of any use traced in the pediatric or the adult Crohn's disease, unlike the ulcerative colitis. So the pathogenesis of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, especially when we are talking about the role of microbe and the host interaction, is probably different between these 2 different entities. And I mean, we think that IBD should be under one umbrella, but the pathogenesis seems to be different. And given the array of various genotype and phenotype of Crohn's disease, we need to work now in this direction and identify the specific probiotic that may be beneficial. I thank you for your patient hearing and invite you for a Commonwealth Pediatric Gastroenterology Conference, which is going to be hosted in India after almost 15 years. I request all of you all to please participate, and there are going to be a lot of opportunities for young investigator papers for them, and you can just go on to 2015 website, and I'll be happy to answer any queries, both for the subject and this. Thank you once again.